The world was not quiet that night. The wind carried the smell of ash, of burnt stone, of bodies left unburied in fields long abandoned. The moon was swollen, hanging heavy over a land that had forgotten peace. And beneath its pale light, thousands of warriors gathered in silence, their shadows stretching across a valley scarred by centuries of conflict. At the front of them all stood a figure that no bard could ever truly describe. His hair was silver, flowing like strands of moonlight down to his armored shoulders. His armor was blackened, scarred from 100 battles, yet it gleamed faintly in the firelight, as if cursed to never grow dull. He was known only as the Silver Blade. His true name had been lost to time. They said he was a man who had once fought for kings, then for gods, and then for no one at all. Some whispered that he had already died once, and that whatever walked now was something else, something neither living nor dead, bound to war as if it were his only reason to exist. Behind him, his army waited. But they were no shining knights, no glorious legions. They were broken men and women, survivors of fallen kingdoms, warriors stripped of banners and honor, bound together only by the simple truth: fight or perish. Among them stood figures every ear in the valley recognized, though they had come from distant worlds and impossible fates. Jon Snow, face pale, eyes shadowed with the ghosts of the north, clutched his sword as if it carried the weight of his family's bloodline. Aragorn, the Ranger King, stood tall, cloak torn, yet eyes bright with unshakable resolve. And near the front, quiet as a wolf, Geralt of Rivia rested his gloved hand on the hilt of his twin blades, his cat-like eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Strange company, bound by strange fate. But in this valley, under this cursed sky, they were soldiers of the same war. The Silver Blade raised his weapon. It was a sword unlike any other. Its steel glowed faintly, not with fire, but with something older, something colder, as if forged from the edge of night itself. When he lifted it high, the army hushed, even the wind seemed to die. He spoke, his voice low but carrying across the ranks. The enemy waits beyond the mist. They will not stop. They cannot stop. Tonight, brothers and sisters, there is no retreat. Tonight, we stand, or the world burns. The words did not echo like the polished speeches of kings. They struck harder, because they were simple and true. Every warrior there knew it. They had come not for glory, not for conquest, but because this was the last place left to stand. A horn sounded in the distance. Deep, mournful, like the groan of some dying beast. Then another. The sound rolled over the valley like thunder. And then the mist began to move. At first, it was just a shifting haze, pale fingers curling across the ground. But as it thickened, shapes emerged within it, shapes that did not belong to the living. Figures with twisted faces, jaws unhinged too wide, bodies stitched from shadows and bone. Their eyes glowed sickly green, like lanterns guiding the damned. A ripple of unease spread through the army. Men gripped their swords tighter. Some whispered prayers. Jon Snow whispered, "The dead, they are too many." Aragorn glanced at him, his voice grim. "Then we give them fewer to take." Geralt only spat into the dirt, muttering words in a language long dead. The Silver Blade did not move. His eyes never left the mist. He stood, statue still, until the first creature screamed, a sound so sharp it seemed to split the night in two. It was a scream of hunger, of hate, of something older than mankind itself. And then the ground began to tremble. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of clawed feet struck the earth. The mist boiled with motion. The enemy was coming. The Silver Blade lowered his sword, pointing it toward the mist, and his voice rose like a thunderclap. "Stand your ground. Tonight we step into hell, and we do not step back." The army roared as one, steel flashing, shields rising. The sound was defiance, desperation, and fury woven together. The mist broke. The first wave came crashing out, a tide of twisted horrors rushing like a flood. The war had begun. And in that instant, as the two forces collided, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. The sound of the collision was not like men meeting men. It was not the crash of shields, nor the ring of steel on steel. It was worse. It was the tearing of flesh, the crunch of bone, the shriek of things that should not exist. The mist erupted in chaos. Creatures with too many limbs, jaws that split into thirds, eyes that glowed from sockets that dripped with rot. They hurled themselves against the human line with such force that shields buckled and men were torn apart in an instant. Blood sprayed into the night air. Screams rose and were swallowed by the roar of war. The battlefield became a sea of madness. The silver blade was the first to answer. His glowing sword carved a wide arc, cutting through 3 of the horrors in a single strike. Black ichor hissed as it hit his armor, burning like acid, but he did not flinch. His silver hair whipped around him as he stepped forward into the storm, his blade dancing with deadly grace. Jon Snow stood to his right, Longclaw flashing in the firelight. A beast with claws like scythes lunged at him, and Jon met it with a roar, driving his sword straight through its chest. The creature shrieked, twisting unnaturally before collapsing in a heap. Blood painted Jon's face, but his eyes were steady. "Hold the line," he shouted, though his voice was nearly drowned out by the cacophony. To the left, Aragorn's voice rose in defiance. "For every step they take, make them pay in blood." His sword rang as it clashed with a monstrous spear. Sparks flew. He drove forward, shield bashing the creature aside before cleaving its head from its shoulders. And then, like a ghost in the chaos, Geralt moved. The Witcher's twin blades gleamed, silver and steel. He spun low, his blade slicing through the legs of a beast that towered over men like a giant. The creature fell with a scream, and before it hit the ground, Geralt plunged his second sword into its skull. His yellow eyes flickered with something between rage and focus, as though this hellscape was no different from the countless hunts he had endured. But for every monster slain, 10 more emerged from the mist. The battlefield drowned in shadows. Men were dragged screaming into the fog, their armor screeching as claws tore them open. Arrows hissed through the air, but many found no purchase in the twisted flesh of the enemy. One soldier, a boy no older than 18, screamed as a creature wrapped its spiked tongue around his throat and yanked him into the darkness. His scream cut off in an instant. Another man's arm was ripped clean from his body before he was devoured alive. The horror was endless. Still, the silver blade carved a path forward. He cut, parried, and struck, his blade glowing brighter with each life it claimed. The ground beneath him was slick with blood, red and black mixing in rivers. His armor was cracked, his face smeared with gore, yet he pressed on, unstoppable, a vision of war itself. A horn sounded from the enemy's side, low, guttural, unnatural. The creatures answered with a collective shriek that rattled bone. Then the earth trembled. From the mist came something larger. A hulking figure, twice the height of a man, its skin stretched tight across bone, its jaw unhinged into a grotesque maw. Chains clattered from its arms, dragging corpses behind it like trophies. The human line faltered. Men backed away, some falling to their knees. Jon Snow tightened his grip on Longclaw, sweat and blood dripping from his brow. "Gods help us," he whispered. But Aragorn stepped forward, voice like iron. "No gods will save us. Only steel." He raised his blade, his eyes burning with fury. The silver blade moved ahead of them both, his voice carrying over the carnage. "Then let steel speak." The towering beast roared and charged, each step shaking the battlefield. Its claws swiped, sending men flying like broken dolls. Screams followed as bodies hit the ground with sickening cracks. The silver blade met it head-on. His sword struck its claw, sparks flying. The impact rattled the air, the sound echoing like thunder. Geralt darted to the side, slashing at the creature's leg, but its hide was thick, armored like stone. Aragorn struck from the other flank, his blade sinking deep into its side, yet the monster hardly staggered. Jon Snow charged in with a cry, plunging Longclaw toward its chest. The beast caught the blade mid-strike with its clawed hand. Bones cracked as it squeezed, forcing Jon to his knees. With a roar, the silver blade swung again, his glowing sword severing the monster's wrist. Black ichor sprayed as the claw fell, and Jon was freed. The beast howled, its voice a sound that tore through the battlefield, freezing men in terror. But the silver blade pressed forward, his face grim, his eyes burning with relentless purpose. Around them, the battle only grew worse. Men screamed. Monsters shrieked. The night itself seemed to bleed. And above it all, the silver blade raised his sword once more. "Do not yield," he bellowed. "We fight until the mist breaks, or until we do." The men roared, voices ragged but fierce. They surged forward again, steel clashing against horror, the ground shaking with every step. And as the mist swirled and the blood flowed, one truth became clear. This was no ordinary war. This was the edge of damnation. The battlefield was no longer a place of men and monsters. It had become something else, something unholy. The ground quaked beneath endless waves of horror spilling from the mist. The shrieks of the dying blended with the roars of creatures, creating a symphony of terror that drowned out even the clash of steel. The silver blade stood amidst it, his armor drenched in blood, his sword glowing faintly as if it drank the very souls of those it slew. Around him, his allies fought with desperate fury. Jon Snow cut through shadows that clawed at his throat. Aragorn rallied broken men, dragging them back into line with the force of his will. Geralt moved like a phantom, blades flashing in arcs too quick to follow. Yet the enemy did not break. They did not falter. For every corpse that fell, a dozen more crawled from the fog, their twisted forms blotting out the stars above. And then, the mist thickened. The screams hushed. Even the creatures paused, as though something greater had stepped onto the field. The silver blade froze, his breath misting in the cold air. His hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. He could feel it, an ancient presence, a weight pressing down upon every living soul. From the fog, the ground split open. Black claws the size of spears burst upward, dragging something monstrous into the light. It was no soldier, no beast, it was an abomination. A colossus of flesh and bone, its body stitched together from the corpses of thousands. Limbs jutted at impossible angles, mouths gaped from its torso, screaming in endless agony. Its eyes, dozens of them, burned with sickly green fire. Men fell to their knees at the sight of it. Some dropped their swords and fled, only to be swallowed by the fog. Jon Snow whispered, "Gods be good," his voice was barely a breath. Aragorn's knuckles whitened around his hilt. "That thing is no god's work. It is hell itself." The colossus roared, and the air itself shook. Its breath carried the stench of rot, its voice a chorus of the damned. As it lumbered forward, its footsteps cracked the earth, opening fissures that spewed fire and smoke. The silver blade's voice cut through the terror. "Hold your ground," he roared. "This is what we were forged for." But even his command could not silence the truth burning in every man's heart. This was no battle they could win. The colossus swung its massive arm, and a dozen men were crushed into the dirt, their armor exploding like tin beneath a hammer. Screams echoed as blood sprayed across the field. The creatures' mouths wailed in unison, a shriek so piercing that warriors clutched their ears until blood dripped from them. Geralt leapt forward, silver blade drawn, striking deep into one of the monster's legs. Sparks flew, the flesh was like stone. The creature did not even flinch. It merely turned one of its dozen heads toward him, jaws opening unnaturally wide. Geralt's eyes narrowed. Well, that's new. He dove aside as black bile spewed from the mouth, melting through stone and steel alike. Aragorn charged, driving his blade into the monster's calf. It sank deep, but the wound only oozed thick ichor. The colossus roared and backhanded him, sending him crashing into a line of soldiers. Men tumbled like dominoes, their screams cut short as the monster's foot crushed them under heel. Jon Snow rallied what men he could, shouting orders, forcing the line to reform even as terror gnawed at them. His blade gleamed with firelight, but even he knew this was a battle already slipping beyond hope. The silver blade advanced. His sword burned brighter now, light cutting through the choking fog. He raised it high, his voice shaking the earth itself. "With me," he charged. The monster met him with a bellow, swinging its clawed arm down. The impact shook the valley as the silver blade leapt, his glowing sword slicing deep into its flesh. Black ichor sprayed like a fountain, burning the ground where it landed. For a heartbeat, it seemed the colossus faltered. Men cheered. Hope flickered. Then the abomination laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, it was a sound of hunger. The mouths on its body opened in unison, releasing a deafening chorus of screams. From each mouth, shadows spilled forth, smaller horrors, writhing like maggots, swarming across the battlefield. They fell upon the soldiers, tearing into flesh with claws and teeth. Men vanished beneath waves of writhing shadows, their screams echoing into the night. The battlefield drowned again in chaos. Jon Snow swung wildly, cutting down 3 of the shadowlings, but 5 more leapt at him. Geralt tore them apart with brutal precision, his silver blade flashing, his face grim. Aragorn rallied the remaining line, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "Stand! Stand, damn you! Do not yield!" But the line was breaking. Horror spread faster than courage. Men staggered back, their eyes wide with terror as the swarms devoured everything in sight. The silver blade landed on the creature's shoulder, driving his glowing sword into its flesh. The monster roared, swatting at him with claws the size of trees. He barely clung on, his sword sinking deeper, his eyes blazing with fury. "Fall, damn you," he snarled. But the Colossus did not fall. If anything, it grew stronger, feeding on the blood spilled across the valley. Its body pulsed with sickly green light, its roar shaking mountains miles away. And then, as if the night itself turned against them, the sky split. A crack of lightning, black and crimson, tore across the heavens. From it spilled more shadows, descending like rain, their screeches splitting the air. The men looked up in horror. For the first time, even Aragorn's face betrayed doubt. Jon Snow's voice broke, raw and hoarse. "What in God's name are we fighting?" The silver blade did not answer. His sword burned against the monster's flesh, his eyes alight with rage. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. This was no army. This was no kingdom's foe. This was hell itself, unleashed upon the earth. And it had only just begun. The valley was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard of screams. Smoke choked the sky, fire painted the night in shades of crimson, and the ground was littered with the torn remains of men who had once marched with courage. The silver blade stood on the giant Colossus's shoulder, his glowing sword buried deep into its flesh. The creature shrieked, but still it did not fall. Shadows poured from the mouths across its torso, flooding the earth with horrors. On the ground, Jon Snow, Aragorn, and Geralt struggled to hold what little remained of their lines. The soldiers who had not fled fought like desperate animals, hacking at the swarms of shadowlings that fell upon them. But for every creature slain, 10 more seemed to crawl from the fog. "Fall back," Jon Snow shouted, his voice raw. "Form on me. Hold the line, damn you." Men staggered back, clinging to his command like a lifeline. Aragorn, bloodied and bruised, planted his sword in the ground, dragging men back from the brink of panic. Geralt was everywhere at once, his silver sword flashing, his face grim with the knowledge that this was no ordinary war. And then, silence. The fog thickened. The shadows froze. Even the Colossus paused mid-roar. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. From the heart of the mist, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in black, his armor gleaming with obsidian edges that caught the firelight. His helm bore no face, only a void, a darkness deeper than the night itself. He walked through the carnage as though it parted for him. Shadows bent toward him like loyal dogs. The silver blade froze. His grip tightened on his sword. "So, it's you." Jon Snow's voice trembled. Who is that?" The silver blade's gaze never left the figure. "The one who bound hell to this earth. The betrayer." The betrayer's voice was soft, yet it carried across the entire field. It was smooth, cold, like the whisper of a blade sliding across flesh. "You fought well, Silver Blade. But you fight for a cause already lost." Aragorn spat blood onto the dirt. "We fight for men who refuse to kneel." The betrayer tilted his head, almost curious. "And yet they kneel anyway." He raised a single hand. At his gesture, a dozen soldiers, men from Jon Snow's own line, turned on their brothers. Their eyes glowed with green fire as they drove blades into their comrades' backs. Screams erupted as betrayal spread like wildfire. "No!" Jon roared, his heart breaking as men he'd sworn to protect were cut down by those who had once stood beside them. Geralt's jaw clenched. "He's twisting them, binding their will." The silver blade leapt from the Colossus, landing hard on the blood-soaked earth. His sword flared, casting light against the betrayer's shadow. "This ends tonight." The betrayer laughed softly, a sound that made even hardened men shiver. "No, old friend. Tonight is only the beginning." He raised his hand again, and the earth split open. From the fissure crawled horrors beyond imagining, beasts of bone and sinew, their bodies crawling with worms, their faces twisted in eternal agony. They screamed as they rose, their cries shattering the courage of even the bravest men. The battlefield dissolved into madness. Jon Snow fought like a man possessed, cutting down the twisted soldiers and shouting for his men to rally. Aragorn stood at his side, dragging the broken back into the fight, even as despair gnawed at his soul. Geralt carved through the monsters with grim precision, his silver sword flashing under the blood-red sky. And yet, the tide could not be stemmed. The betrayer advanced, each step sinking the ground into shadow. He moved with calm inevitability, like death itself crossing the field. The silver blade met him head-on, their swords clashing in a storm of light and darkness. The force of their blows split the ground, sent men tumbling like leaves in a storm. Sparks flew, fire erupted, shadows screamed. You betrayed us, the silver blade snarled, their swords locked. You opened the gate. The betrayer's voice was calm, unshaken. I freed us. Humanity was never meant to kneel before gods. So I made us gods. He drove the silver blade back with a crushing strike, his void-like gaze burning with cruel satisfaction. Jon Snow rallied to his side, striking at the shadows that closed in. Aragorn and Geralt forced their way forward, blades flashing as they fought to reach the duel. But the monsters swarmed them, endless in number, dragging them back into the nightmare. The silver blade staggered, his glowing sword flickering. The betrayer pressed harder, his strikes like thunder, his laughter cold as the grave. Look around you, he whispered. Your world is already ash. Your warriors, broken. Your hope, extinguished. The silver blade fell to one knee. His sword dimmed, his body trembling with exhaustion and blood loss. Jon Snow screamed his name, fighting desperately to reach him, but it was too late. The betrayer raised his blade high, shadows coiling around it like serpents. Die, old friend. The sword fell. A blinding flash of light erupted, an explosion that shook the valley to its core. Men were thrown like ragdolls. The colossus roared in fury. Shadows shrieked as if burned. And when the smoke cleared, the silver blade was gone. Only his sword remained, buried in the dirt, its glow fading into darkness. The battlefield froze. Jon Snow stood pale as death, Aragorn's eyes wide with shock, Geralt's face carved in grim horror. The betrayer lifted his helm, and for the first time, his voice softened. Your champion is fallen. And now, the world is mine. The night trembled. The last hope flickered. And darkness closed in. The battlefield lay silent for a heartbeat after the silver blade vanished. Smoke curled across the ruined valley, lit only by the green fire of the betrayer's shadows. Soldiers knelt in despair, their eyes hollow. The world seemed to shudder beneath the weight of inevitable defeat. Jon Snow's sword slipped from his fingers. Aragorn's chest heaved, his strength nearly spent. Even Geralt, blood dripping from his wounds, looked upon the betrayer and muttered under his breath, so this is how it ends. The betrayer raised his black blade high, shadows swirling like a storm around him. His voice thundered across the battlefield, calm yet merciless. Kneel, and your suffering will end. Resist, and I will turn your bones into weapons against your kin. A few men collapsed to their knees, sobbing. Others screamed and charged in a final, hopeless rush, only to be torn apart by the creatures spilling from the fissures. And then, the ground trembled. A pulse of light radiated outward, cutting through the fog, scattering shadows. The betrayer froze, his helm turning toward the glow. From the earth where the silver blade's sword lay, light erupted like dawn breaking through endless night. The weapon lifted into the air, blazing brighter than ever before. And with it, rose the silver blade himself. But he was changed. His armor gleamed with radiant fire, his eyes blazed like suns, and his wounds were gone. He had become more than a warrior, he was a vessel of the very light that darkness sought to extinguish. Jon Snow gasped. By the gods! Aragorn's weary lips curved into a grim smile. He is not finished. The silver blade lifted his sword high, his voice echoing like thunder. I am the last light. And I will not let you take this world. The battlefield erupted. Soldiers who had fallen rose again, their courage reignited. Jon Snow seized his sword and charged, Aragorn rallied the broken, and Geralt bared his teeth in a predator's grin. The tide turned, not because the enemy weakened, but because hope had been reborn. The betrayer snarled, shadows flaring around him. So be it. Then you will die as a god, and I will feast on eternity. The final clash began. The colossus lumbered forward, its mouths shrieking, but Jon Snow and Aragorn led the charge against its legs, hacking and driving it back. Geralt vaulted onto its back, silver blade flashing as he carved into the creature's necks, forcing it to stagger. The silver blade met the betrayer head-on. Their swords collided, light against shadow, the impact cracking the earth and splitting the sky. Every blow shook the heavens. Firestorms and shadow storms clashed as the two warriors unleashed their full power. The betrayer struck with impossible strength, his black blade carving through steel and stone. But the silver blade moved with fury beyond mortal limits, his glowing sword cleaving through shadow as if it were nothing. You betrayed us, the silver blade roared, his blade flashing. You opened hell's gate. The betrayer's laughter shook the air. I gave us freedom. No gods, no chains, only power. The silver blade struck again, his sword driving the betrayer to his knees. But as he raised the killing blow, the betrayer whispered words that froze even the bravest heart. "Without me, the gate never closes." The silver blade faltered. The fissure yawned wider, shadows spilling forth endlessly. The betrayer laughed, black fire surging around him. "Kill me, and hell consumes this world forever. Spare me, and I will close it, in my name." The battlefield trembled. Men froze. Even Aragorn and Jon looked toward the silver blade in dread. Was there truly no way to win? Then Geralt shouted from the Colossus's back, his voice hoarse with rage. "End him. Gates can be closed, men cannot be unbroken." Jon Snow roared, "Do it." The silver blade's eyes burned with resolve. He raised his glowing sword and drove it through the betrayer's chest. Light exploded. The betrayer screamed, not in anger, but in disbelief, as his body dissolved into nothing. Shadows wailed, tearing free from the earth, shrieking as the light consumed them. The fissure roared like a dying beast, collapsing inward, its fire extinguished by the flood of brilliance. The Colossus shrieked, its monstrous body unraveling into ash. The battlefield shook, then fell silent. When the light faded, only the silver blade remained, standing in the ruins. His armor cracked, his sword dim, but his eyes still blazed. Jon Snow staggered toward him. "You did it. You saved us." The silver blade shook his head. "No. I only bought you time." Aragorn frowned. "What do you mean?" The silver blade looked toward the horizon, where faint wisps of shadow still lingered in the air. "The gate is closed, for now. But darkness never dies. One day, it will rise again. And when it does, you must be ready." Geralt smirked, bloodied but unbowed. "Sounds like you're planning to leave us the hard work." The silver blade managed the faintest smile. "No. I'll be waiting. Where light is needed, I will return." His sword shattered into sparks, his body dissolving into radiant light. The wind carried his final words across the valley. "Remember me, not as a savior, but as a man who refused to kneel." The last spark vanished. The battlefield stood silent, bathed in the first rays of dawn. Jon Snow sheathed his sword, his eyes wet with grief and awe. Aragorn looked skyward, his hand on his chest. Geralt muttered, almost to himself, "Damn stubborn fool." The world had survived, but at a cost that would never be forgotten. And so began the legend of the Silver Blade. The last light against the darkness.